Hello and welcome to interest.co.nz. I'm Janae Tibshirani and today I'm joined by Chlöe Swarbrick. Chlöe impressed us all with her fresh approach, eloquence and sincerity in the Auckland mayoralty race. While she finished third, she isn't ditching politics. The day after the US election, Chlöe announced she'd run for the Green Party next year.
Yeah, funnily enough, I had actually planned that announcement about a week prior to that election result coming out.
Right.
But then obviously, and actually filmed the video prior to Trump winning as well. But the undertones that were perceived subsequent to me putting it out, obviously chronologically after Trump had won, was that it was a response to it, but it actually initially wasn't.
Right, well actually that's what I was going to ask you, because in the video that you released on social media, you said that there was a tide for change. And then you referenced the world stage, and you said people were unhappy with the status quo, and you didn't want us as New Zealanders to fall into the trap of hatred or fear. Chlöe, how far off do you think New Zealand is at the moment, where America has been and the UK, in terms of falling into this trap of hatred and fear and perhaps making some pretty bold political calls?
Well, I think that what both those things, Brexit and Trump being elected president, demonstrate is, well, one of the facets of what it demonstrates is a failing of the left, to be perfectly honest. I think that both the campaign for Remain in the UK and Hillary Clinton's campaign looked to a lot of people like the status quo. And what a lot of people are wanting right now is change, because a lot of people feel as though they aren't progressing in their lives, and that social mobility is decreasing. No matter how hard they work, they're not able to move up the rung. So they're looking for something to blame. And unfortunately, I think that quite frequently that thing to blame is a scapegoat. So people are looking for change, any kind of change, and unfortunately it is, for the most part right now, manifesting in rather negative change. So what I think personally needs to happen, and what I'd like to be a part of in New Zealand, is the tide for progressive change. So I'd really like to see us as the left galvanise next year to present a really strong, viable alternative option for progressive change in New Zealand.
Do you think there's a sort of a tide for change for the Green Party? Do you think that they are evolving or need to evolve more?
Well, I think one of the major things that I encountered when I actually announced is there were quite a few of my supporters who wanted me to start my own party, because a lot of them felt quite disillusioned by politics of the day, and there are a lot of narratives surrounding who politicians are, and the old career politician who's evil. And what I found in working in journalism is that there are actually a lot of politicians with great intentions, but quite frequently they are unable to action them as a result of the political machine as a whole. But in coming back to the perceptions that I encountered in announcing, there were quite a few people who voiced their preconceived notions that the Greens either were on two ends of the spectrum, either trying to appeal to too many people with too many types of policy, or to other people, the Greens were solely the climate change party. And I think that one of the things that I would really like to help with is trying to communicate and articulate the progressive vision that the Greens do have. Because if you do actually investigate and you look at what the Green Party represents, it is a progressive New Zealand. It is, there's a plethora of different areas which they are hitting, which would encompass a lot of the legislative change that we need to see to be a better country and to work for all New Zealanders as well. And I do think that there is definitely a feeling as though injustice is kind of on the rise, insofar as right now we know factually that 1 in 100 New Zealanders are homeless. But on the other side of the coin, 65% of New Zealanders own a home, and a lot of them are accidental millionaires. And I think what we really need to do is just get that conversation going without blame and ask people what kind of future they want for our country.
Sure. Look, a lot of people might be thinking, here is a person with a whole lot of potential, someone really bright, educated, keen.
Thank you.
Why did she not join the National Party? They are sort of tipped to be the winning party at the next election, then you'll be in government, and why not them? Did the National Party ask you to join?
No, the National Party didn't actually ask me to join. I was approached by a few parties, but the National Party wasn't one of them. But what it basically came down to, even actually in thinking that I wanted to go further into politics, because at the beginning of this year, it totally wasn't something on my radar. The mayoralty bid was more I suppose it could be characterised as a bit of a protest move. I was trying to get people to care. I wanted to educate people about how council worked and how it could impact their lives in a practicable way, and obviously try and get them to vote. So yeah, it was an alignment of values as to why I joined the Green Party, and also their track record, and I am supportive of the way that Matiria stood up in Parliament and said that we weren't going to join support and congratulation for Trump's presidency, because at the same time I do think that you can have respect for the democratic process, but you can still challenge international leaders, and I think that that's actually going to become a lot more important in the next few decades as the world does become more globalised. Right now, the way that things kind of operate is that we are quite international leaders do put up with each other in some sense or another, and there isn't all too much talk about international regimes, and I think the dialogue's going to shift in that respect, definitely.
Sure. Okay. Look, Chlöe, you wrote an opinion piece in The Spin-Off recently, and I really liked one of the lines you used. You said, "I'm 22 years old. It's a relevant fact because my age informs my life experience, perspective and prejudice, but I don't think it's my defining feature."
Yeah.
So, key thing, I guess just want to pick that apart a little bit. And in terms of some of your experiences and perspectives, who are your mentors? Who are some of the people that have shaped your views or have helped you sort of get to where you are now?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think probably the biggest influence, if we're talking about my life as a whole, would be my father. And I was a really precocious and annoying child. Anybody who's been with me through schooling or even at tertiary can testify to that. I'm the person who always puts their hand up to challenge or question the notion that's being put forward by the teacher or the lecturer. I'm sorry to anybody who's ever had to put up with a class with me in it. But yeah, my father kind of picked up on that when I was younger and got me really interested and engaged with politics, and I think that's why I ended up in journalism initially. So he would get me watching a lot of documentaries about people like Mahatma Gandhi when I was 10, 11 years old, and then I'd do these school speeches about it. So I've kind of always resonated with one of Mahatma Gandhi's ideas, in particular the concept that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. That's interestingly enough really come to the fore for me again at this time, with the international political context being what it is, that we do need to stop blaming people and we do need to have a conversation. We do need to stop shutting each other down for bigotry or otherwise, and really engage in that respect. So my biggest influence and inspiration would probably be my dad.
Sure, great. Look, and then the other part of your statement is, I guess, some of your defining features, and I know that is your policy, and that's something which I know you've been sort of calling out for the media to discuss more, is your policy. Firstly, I'd like to talk about the Resource Management Act.
Okay.
That amendments have just recently been passed. I'm just wondering how you think the tension can be sort of dealt with when we have the government wanting to, I guess, fast track a lot of development, and that's what a lot of the changes encompass. But then the Green Party being really keen on ensuring the whole process is democratic and looks after the environment and everything. I mean, how do we build more houses in Auckland if before we do that we have to consult, pretty much everyone involved to do it?
I mean, we do know factually that only around 10% of consents are actually notified. So those are the ones that actually do get the public conversation going. So by far and away, the majority of them aren't actually, and it doesn't mean that everybody gets to talk about every single consent and hold it up per se. What I'm concerned about is that the RMA has become a whipping boy for every single problem ever to do with building, and it is the amorphous red tape that we keep talking about. I think that I'm actually on board with Geoffrey Palmer in this respect. I think that we need to be looking at the RMA as a whole instead of making all of these cuts from a 25-year-old piece of legislation. I'm a recent law graduate as well and looked at the RMA as part of land law, and I can tell you it's an incredibly confusing piece of legislation. But if we're talking about getting more houses actually built, there's a lot of places that we can be going about doing that. So obviously throughout the local government campaign, I encountered a a lot of people on all different sides of the fence, those working within council, those who had recently left their jobs in council, really good people, but felt infuriated by the bureaucracy of it, so sought another job that they could feel fulfilled in. And then obviously the people who had come up against the consenting process and just felt infuriated and frustrated and run down, and had become expensive and super long. And I think my solution was to increase transparency. Because if you increase transparency, it means that the average person knows where they sit in the process. But further, we can pinpoint the issues.
So is that sort of, if I apply for resource consent, to send me emails and be like, look, it's gone to engineer number 1, and it's going to be another week, and then it'll get to the next
exactly
stage.
And that's kind of the forecast. I mean, it could manifest in a plethora of different ways. It could be some kind of online interface. It's crazy to think that the council would be integrating great technology, but it could manifest in a number of different ways. But the major thing is just making sure that people know where they sit in the process and where it's forecast that they should be sitting in the next week or so. And if there is that hitch, it's really easily identifiable, and we can go about fixing it.
Okay, so perhaps more resourcing for councils.
Resourcing is a huge one, and I encountered that talking to people who work within that team in council.
Okay, Chlöe, another big issue for Auckland, but that also goes up to central government, is migration. Yep. And we've had migration stats out just recently, and they just keep hitting new records. What is your view on this? Do you think the government should be closing the door a little bit, or managing migration better?
I think that we need to have a conversation about it again, and this is one of the many areas where it is incredibly polarising, and it can quite easily become super dogmatic. I think that we do need to acknowledge very strongly that it is an area where racism and xenophobia can become quite pertinent and can become the subtext for the conversation. And we need to acknowledge that strongly because it is an important part of the conversation. But we do need to, again, move on from that and be able to talk about immigration as it affects people. And again, obviously, I'm aligning with the Green Party, and I agree with their stance on sustainable immigration.
So do you think the levels are too high at the moment?
I think, personally, to be perfectly honest with you, I haven't done anywhere near enough investigation into it to be able to tell you this is the level that it should be. But I do think that at the very least there is there's a public conception of it, public perception rather, and it means that we do need to be talking about it in a very open way. We do need to be putting all of the facts on the table and discussing it in that open and transparent way.
What about foreigners buying property? Should there be some restrictions on that?
I do think so. Yeah, definitely. Particularly, it's obvious in Auckland that it's a problem here, but. Yeah, it just, of course, it makes sense for people who are not living in the country to be purchasing property in the country. But again, there is a little bit of concern on my part that it can turn into a bit of a moral panic where people are concerned about people. It can become a racist discussion, again, where people are concerned about Chinese people purchasing property and not realising that those Chinese people are as much New Zealanders as they are.
Yes. Sure. Chloe, look, we'll wrap it up there, but thank you very much for your time. I think a key message which is coming through a lot of what you're saying is that, having really good discussions and transparency and dialogue and addressing these issues from a different perspective.
Giving respect to people, I think, is the major one.
Sure.
I encountered a lot of people throughout my campaign who would come at me predominantly actually ad hominem attacks, so it would be about my appearance or their perceptions about what my age meant, but a few of them about my policy. And I found time and time again that if you give people respect, you get it back. And I think that it's all about changing the tone and the way that we do politics.
Well, that's so encouraging, and I'm sure a lot of people will be watching that and really hoping that you might sort of be able to instill a bit of a cultural change among our political culture. So thank you for your time, Chloe.
Thank you.
I'm Janae Tibbs-Shirani from interest.co.nz.